scheduled because I was sick.
Right.
He can't do it until Thursday of this week.
No problem.
But I do still have that scheduled.
Good. I will make sure that that submission box stays open.
Okay.
I'll take a couple of notes as to what I need to do today. Okay. Okay, I'll make sure that's still open.
Okay, thank you.
So that you can submit that. So this week the reading is relatively light, but the material isn't. And so what you're going to be doing is reading chapters 2, 3, and 14. 2 is about the Affordable Care Act. 3 is about what would constitute an ideal long-term care system, and has some very interesting topics in there that have come out of several studies that were done on what would make long-term care work better. And so it's worth really understanding. Number 4 goes into governance, which is really the topic of the week, which is how these things are operated. I've already posted to the discussion for this week some information. And so this topic really is something that will affect you because as an administrator, you would be reporting to the board of directors, board of governors, whatever they call, board of trustees even, whatever they call the managing board of the organization. If it's a for-profit organization, it's often a board of directors. If it's a not-for-profit, it's a board of governors or trustees. And if it's a religiously affiliated organization, it is undoubtedly going to be trustees. But nonetheless, the relationship is the same, no matter what we call that board, in that you report directly to them. They're responsible for basically strategic decisions, things like approving budgets, things like managing the top level, managing you and making certain that you are fulfilling your responsibilities. They are not supposed to get involved in day-to-day activities, do they? You bet. I have served on boards of trustees and boards of directors of nonprofits in the past, schools and service organizations, and it is easy to fall into that trap when you're a board of getting involved in the day-to-day operations, and that is not usually allowed. In fact, there are some, I have seen instances where boards have been dissolved by bodies that have the authority to do it, state agencies or accrediting agencies that have the ability to basically dissolve a board because of interference. But there's a fine line between interfering and becoming involved in day-to-day operations and managing the administrator, especially if the administrator is not doing what the board thinks they should be doing. And there, again, it's a fine line of distinction there as to when it may be appropriate for a board to become a little more active and when it is absolutely inappropriate. So and it all really depends on the relationship between the board and the senior manager. the company, the pharmaceutical company I worked in, Burroughs Wellcome, or the Wellcome Foundation, was really having a great deal of difficulty with our CEO based in London. And they were having, there were lots of disagreements over policy, strategy, and so forth. The board did something very radical. They sold the company out from under the CEO. And they had the right to do that as a board of directors. And that's how they dealt with their problem. And, it was really kind of a shock to the rest of us when it happened, needless to say. But there are ways that a board can function and do that. Now, this was a for-profit operation, obviously. Some long-term care facilities are not-for-profit. They're either government-run or affiliated with a religious organization, or have been structured in such a manner as to make them tax exempt and therefore not for profit. But the basic principles are going to be the same. So this is an area that going in as an administrator, which is where you want to be, you need to understand the basic ground rules of these kinds of relationships and understand the boundaries that have been set up that are supposed to make the governance work. It doesn't work to have a board running an organization, but I worked with another nonprofit, a school, where we were constantly clashing with the school's director because she was doing things that could have gotten the school into severe legal trouble. And at one point, she tried to threaten the board with taking us to the accrediting agency and getting the board dissolved if we continued to oppose some of her policies. Ultimately, we had to fire her. And that was very difficult because she was one of the school founders as well. So there can be very contentious relationships. But in reality, those are probably the exception rather than the rule, which doesn't mean that it doesn't happen often enough to be aware of it. So these are some things to consider. Plus, management and governing structure goes in many directions. As the administrator, of course, you're not a dictator, but organizations are not democracies either. Unless the organization is structured that way, and there are some employee-owned organizations that function on a very democratic model. Basically, the administrator gets to make the rules and gets to set the tone. And smart administrators, of course, work very closely with everyone in the organization so that never gets to the point of contention. But I have worked with people who thought they were little dictators and that everyone had to jump to their tune, and the organizations were not effective.
Well, look at that Democratic, the RP from, oh my gosh, where's she from? Movita, I don't remember her last name, but she's part of the RP for the Democrat, and she just got arrested for stealing from her own charity for mental illness children.
Right. Yeah, and that is something that should never have been allowed to happen by the board, the independent board of that charity, because every organization like that is supposed to have an oversight group, usually a board of trustees, that watches that carefully. So, and in fact, I remember a few years ago when the head of Jefferson County Head Start was found to be stealing the money from Head Start. And my basic response and my wife's basic response was, how could you do that to the people you're supposed to serve? And I hope they lock you up and throw away the key.
Right.
And that's exactly what this person deserves. Yeah, I remember reading about that and thinking, well, you need to be fired
Mm-hmm.
and jailed because that's a felony.
Yep.
And that should be the end of the story for her. So we'll have to see how that works out. But the problem is people get tempted by having access to money, and they forget that it's not theirs. And that's something that, again, your board should be watching your accounts. I mean, when I was working on boards, we would go through the budget every meeting. We'd meet at least once a month, and we would go through the budget at every meeting, and we'd go through the financial condition, because of course a school is always on the edge of running out of money. And United Way agency is also at risk of that, which is where I've served. But we would go through and look at the budget every single meeting. We would occasionally ask some difficult questions, and people would be expected to defend their choices. And for the most part, you fortunately, you have honest people involved, and this is not an issue. But occasionally you get a bad apple like this person or the guy at Jefferson County Head Start that give all of these people a bad name.
Mm-hmm.
So that is something that I fault. I also fault the board. Now, can a clever financial person hide things? Oh yeah, yeah. You can fool people, but if the board is paying close enough attention, over time they're going to catch that, and they're going to take whatever action they need to take to deal with it. So that's an interesting topic, and it is something to be aware of. And that's the board's job, is to monitor the financial and other health of the organization and make sure that it is maintained properly. So great. That's a good question and a good point. Okay, let's go to this week's material. Okay. Your assignment this week, assignment 2. The assignment 1 is the usual. Fortunately, there's only the 3 chapters. There's no additional material.
Woohoo!
Yeah, right. An easy week, and especially since you fell behind by being sick, that's a blessing.
Yeah.
So here we're looking at. You're going to. Let's see if we can raise this up. Course ARC assignment 3.
I have a question about ombudsmans.
Ombudsman? Okay.
I watched in the video on the ombudsman and how they are advocates for the residents.
Right.
Do the ombudsman, are they supposed to come around to the nursing homes and talk to the residents? Because I've never seen one.
That depends on the relationship between the ombudsman and the organization. Normally speaking, they are generally there and it should be made clear to the residents that they're available. They can be contacted with any concern that they have, and the residents' families should also have access to the ombudsman when they see a concern.
What if the staff sees a concern? Can they call the ombudsman for the benefit of the patient, or do I have to go up the chain of command?
You should try going up the chain of command first.
Okay.
Because a lot of times, quite frankly, when there's a problem, the problem lies with structure and staffing. But if you see something that, and if you get no relief from that, you can contact the ombudsman and register a complaint. You know, theoretically, that makes you a whistleblower, and there are plenty of protections for you in place so that you can't be punished for doing that. But there's always the risk, and that, which is why you prefer to go up the chain of command.
Yeah.
You can also, if you really see a problem, you can look at going up to the board. That's a dangerous step, however, because it will put you on the wrong side of the administrator.
Right.
But it's something that, you know, if it's necessary, and in the case of something like finding out that this woman, I don't know how this woman actually got caught raiding the treasury of her nonprofit. But you know, it's possible that someone actually did report that up to her board, and anonymously, and that's something that that can happen. And you know, we're seeing all sorts of, you know, unfortunately, when you have what look like large amounts of money, and of course, a large amount of money to people like you and me is very different from a large amount of money to someone like Elon Musk.
Right.
But you know, what looks like a large amount of money can tempt people into doing things that their better sides would not allow them to do, to put it in the best possible terms.
Right.
But you know, yeah, your question about ombudsman is real. The ombudsman should be sort of like the in the government departments we have ethics offices, and you know, when people have ethical complaints, they take them. We're seeing this right now in the wacky world of Washington. How this all started was a complaint filed up to the ethics people and others about the behavior of certain people in the administration. And I'm not just referring to the president, but some of his other people. And that really is kind of interesting because, of course, the ethics office reports to the government. So there is supposed to be a structure of complete independence that allows these people to do their job, and that's the function of the ombudsman. Hospitals have them; they're hospital employees, but the relationship is such that they have enough independence that they can actually do their job without fear of retribution. Now, is there retribution? Yeah. That was one of the things that brought Richard Nixon down, was firing a special investigator who should have been allowed to do his job and was doing it, which is why Nixon fired him. And that really was almost the last nail in Nixon's, the coffin of Nixon's being able to remain in office. So, going back to that, the ombudsman is supposed to be the patient advocate and be able to take action. There are lots of rules. We all know this. Long-term care, most of your patients are going to be elderly. And so we have, of course, at least here in Larimer County, we have the Larimer County Office on Aging, which has adult protective services, and ultimately they can come in. And that the ombudsman is someone who is sort of in place to prevent the need for getting APS or Child Protective Services or any of the other social service agencies from having to be involved. And it also gives the patients, a lot of times patient complaints are things that very little can be done. I mean, the complaint is often the food is awful. Okay, yeah, it's not killing you.
Right.
It may not taste good, but it's not a major problem. But if you feel that you, as a resident, or your loved one who is in the facility is not getting the right care, then the ombudsman is there to run interference. And usually what happens is the ombudsman will go up through whatever structure they have, possibly directly to the administrator, and the administrator will simply fix it because that is really the right thing to do morally as well as legally. It also turns out to be what I call the low energy solution, which is just fix it, don't waste your time, and just take care of it. And it also, quite frankly, goes back to the squeaky wheel principle. Those who go to the ombudsman often get what they need. Those who don't, nobody knows. So that's why we have them. Okay. They are often an employee of these organizations, and so they have access to the records, and they can check things themselves. So it's an interesting position, not one I'd like to be in, but then I'm tired. I've been fighting the system for my family for long enough. I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
So, but part of this assignment 3, to go back to this, is to go into this course arc module, which talks about governing boards. There's lots of issues here. Each of these, you should read these and look at what this has to do with governing boards. This is actually a pretty important thing for you as a future administrator to understand, is the purpose of this board and how you interact with them. Hopefully you'll have a very good interaction. All right, what's going on here? Okay, so that's what you're looking at here. So you're gonna look at the details and go to the prompt. You'll create a PowerPoint and a presentation, long-term governing boards best practices. So look at this. You're looking at just 8 slides, and make it informative, but don't crowd it up. Think about how you would use that to actually make a presentation to some group of students as to what the best practices for a governing board in long-term care would be. So so you have a title and a reference slide. So you've got 6 slides of content. Okay. So you have some notes on each slide. So you can do that in PowerPoint, or you can put the notes in a Word document. I don't care how you manage that. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So this, this is something that you will have to.
So that is in the assignment itself, that little link.
Yeah, the link down here at the bottom of the paragraph, just above the prompt, there's a link to Course Arc Assignment 3 content.
Okay.
So that's what I just had. Did that not display on the screen?
Yeah, it did.
Okay, great.
And I was kind of wondering, I was like, I better ask again to make sure where I could find it.
Yeah, it's right there. So it's actually a pretty good discussion of the issues. So let's go back. So the discussion this week has to do with leadership, and we start with governance. Governance really is about who is leading the organization, and it's a to some extent it's a bit of a shared structure between the board and the administrator, with the board being responsible for essentially strategic issues and oversight of the operations, approval of budgets, approval of any policies and procedures, and any amendments thereto. Care quality falls under monitoring and making certain that you're delivering care that meets all legal requirements. And hopefully there will be a moral imperative behind that as well, because the legal requirements and moral requirements are only different in the fact that there are often more moral requirements than legal. So, and it depends on the philosophy of the organization. If you're working for a religious organization, you'll probably take the moral imperatives more seriously and make them a bigger part of the way the company is run. But then of course the administrator is in charge of day-to-day operations. And that means understanding the structure of the organization, getting to know your senior managers, developing a relationship with them that will deliver the most effective and best care to your residents. So the prompt is talking about what happens if the board gets involved and begins to get involved with the day-to-day operational decisions, and some ideas as to what happens next. I love this. Should they be held liable for negative outcomes, such as a patient death, if the board acted contrary to the administrator's recommendation? So that'll be an interesting thing to think about. Because of course it's always the horror story. Somebody gets involved, changes a decision by the on-ground personnel, and that applies as much to the administrator making decisions that are operational in departments that cause a problem as well. So it's not just between the board and the administrator, although here they're talking about that, but it also goes down the line as well. Who's responsible, and how, and where's the liability? Lawyers, make bundles of money on that question.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, the other thing is, of course, patients die. It is a simple fact of existence in this world. As I said to my daughters one time, to their horror at the moment, birth is a death sentence. So this happens. Mm-hmm. But are we, there is a difference also in terms of the type of organization you're in. If your care organization is a hospice, well, your patients come there to die. So even though some graduate from hospice and go home.
Oh, I love it when they do.
Oh yeah, yeah. My wife had a patient one time who was in and out of hospice 3 times. She went in, they took her off all her meds, she got better, she came home, and she was on she was a definition of polypharmacy, but she came home. So then they put her back on all her meds. And then 6 months later, she went back in. They took her off all her meds. She came home. They didn't get the message. Here is where I fault the medical system. They weren't connecting the dots. They took her off her meds. She got better. Were the problems the meds?
Right.
And, I think the answer to that is likely to be, yep, they were the meds. So they put her back on her meds the 3rd time, and this time she did not come out of hospice.
So they killed her.
So they did. And it's hard to say. My brother-in-law, my wife's sister's husband, passed away 2 years ago. He was on hospice. He had, 2 or 3 different kinds of cancer and all sorts of other issues. And, they kept upping his morphine dose until he passed. And we don't know that they didn't assist in that. Now, would he have survived anyway? Probably not much longer, if really any longer. But, it's a fine line. And of course, hospice, you expect your patient. That's what they're doing. That's where my father is at the moment, on hospice in a hospital.
When I first started at a nursing home, I didn't know what hospice was.
Uh-huh.
And Pathways came in and we call it the cocktail. They started administering the cocktail, and I found out what it was. And I was really upset because I told them, you're murdering him. And they're like, well, he has stage 4 cancer. He's dying. And would you rather him be comfortable as he's going, or, would you want him to sit here in pain and die because of the pain? And I still don't know how I feel on that, because it's assisted suicide in a roundabout way. But I wouldn't want my loved one, like when Grandpa stayed at our house and I took care of him and I administered his meds, and I felt the same way. Am I killing him? Am I giving him too much medication? And the nurse kept insisting, no, Crystal, he has pancreatic cancer. He's dying. He's in pain. He needs this medication. Like, okay.
Yeah.
But I felt that way. I felt that I was killing him.
It's a convoluted question, of course, because, as I say, my father is on a morphine drip, and they've increased his dose. We watched it happen with Susan's brother-in-law. They increased the dose, and we don't know that they didn't accelerate the process. On the other hand, he was in extreme discomfort.
Yeah.
So what do you do? Is it better to, do whatever is necessary to make them comfortable? Or is it better to make them really suffer their last time? It's a hard question. I can understand why there would be some people who simply couldn't do it for that exact reason.
Yeah.
And I have the greatest respect for the people who can actually work in that business and maintain any sort of positive attitude about life. It's a toughie. I've been through that discussion the last few days with my brother-in-law, who's back on the East Coast and is my father's POA, who didn't understand what hospice was when he signed the papers. And it never occurred to me that he didn't know what it was, because we discussed it at length, and agreed that, if it was time for him to do that, then it was time. And so when they removed his feeding tube, and NG tubes are very uncomfortable, and the people that have them always say that it really is an uncomfortable way to be fed. Pumping a bunch of liquid into a stomach that doesn't really want food,
Yeah.
that's really no fun. But he got real unhappy until we had a long talk. My father was unable to swallow, so he could not eat food. And in fact, for the last couple of months, he has been not eating very much at all. His care person, he had 24/7 care at home. His care person would be able to get maybe a spoonful or two of chicken soup into his mouth, and that would be it. He could not swallow. So after he failed several swallow tests, that's when they made the decision that it's time for him to go on hospice, because he wasn't going to be able to eat, and there was no way he was coming out. So it's a tough one, but I had to do that with both my brother-in-law and with my niece. Go through, what is hospice, what is the purpose, and both of them have seen it. They just didn't understand what was going on. And I was a little surprised when they had my father intubated, because he was both septic and had pneumonia when he went into the hospital. They intubated him, and then when they pulled the breathing tube, he was breathing on his own, which sort of surprised the medical folks. But I understand how stubborn he is. So I was only mildly, surprised by the result. And I thought it was about a 50-50 chance. Well, my brother-in-law remembers that when his father was dying after a major hemorrhagic stroke, they they turned off the ventilator and removed the tube, and he lasted for another month. But he was able to take some nutrition as well.
Yeah.
So he just didn't understand it. It's a tough business. I don't think I'd be comfortable working in that setting personally. We had my mother-in-law on home hospice here before she passed away this summer, and that was an interesting experience. She never did stop eating until about 24 hours before she passed. She was one of those people that, we normally say, if you're getting ready to pass, you quit eating. And she would say things like, well, I don't know why I'm here. This is so uncomfortable. And Susan would say, most people, when they're ready to go, just stop eating. And she'd look at her and smile and say, I know, and keep on eating. But that was one of her pleasures in life, was eating.
Well, when Grandpa passed away, like a couple days before he passed away, he wanted some vodka. And this man hadn't drank in over 15 years. And I wouldn't give it to him because of the medications he was on. And then the nurse came in and she says, no, Crystal, if that's what he wants, you give it to him.
Yeah.
So I did. And
yep. Yeah. One of the things that we regret was that my mother-in-law viewed toast as merely a way to convey large amounts of jelly into her mouth. And one of our regrets is that we didn't just hand her the jelly jar and the spoon and say, "Go to it, Mom." But it's something that to think about. Yeah, right. The nurse is right. It's what he wants. It's not going to hurt him at this point.
Yep.
So why not? So yeah, it's kind of it's a tough time. But we used pathways as well. So I thought they were really good. In fact, we have remained friends with the chaplain that they assigned to my mother-in-law's case.
Is she super skinny with short brown hair?
No,
Oh,
no,
okay.
this is Jane, Chaplain Jane, and I can't remember her last name right now. But no, she's not super skinny. She's not fat by any stretch of the imagination, but she certainly isn't skinny. But she's cool. We've become friends with her, and that's been nice because she's such a loving human being.
Yeah.
Got us through some times that were difficult. She would come over once every couple of weeks to visit my mother-in-law and spend most of her time with us because my mother-in-law really wasn't interested.
Yeah.
So, but it was a pleasure to meet her. So we see her for dinner on occasion. So
Good.
it's nice to have that connection. Okay, so we've talked about the discussion. And then, of course, there's the usual assessment. You can also get to that course arc assignment through this link here in the shell.
Okay.
Outside of the, oh, no, you can't. I will turn that on. We'll publish that. Now it's available. Okay, so it should be there. If you refresh your screen, you should be able to see that link.
So, I'm going back to week 2.
Sure.
With week 2 on the discussion, it's saying to list 2 additional constraints.
Mm-hmm.
So, I seen the constraints of like the government, the billing and the financials and all of that. So are you talking other constraints of like the staff don't have time to do their daily cares, or they have unloyal staff that steal and treat the residents badly?
That is yeah, and it sort of falls into a legal constraint as well.
Yeah.
But staffing is one of the things that you may want to consider.
Okay.
In that, because as you know, it's hard to find sufficient and good staff.
Yes.
But there's also budgetary restraints that are placed on the organization by the Board of Governors. So there's others as well.
Okay.
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 All right. So we're going to go back there. So any other questions about this week's work?
Not at the moment. I might email you if I have questions.
Okay.
And
I will be happy to try to answer that. I will be out of pocket all day Wednesday.
okay.
Because we'll be traveling. You can't get directly to Washington, D.C. from here. So at least not to National Airport. So let's just talk briefly about week 4. That one's going to be a bigger week. There's like 6 chapters and a couple of, and an article and a video as well. So looking forward, this week's easy, so we make it up next week.
All right.
I will plan on talking to you on Monday from Washington, and I will, if I think of anything I need to say, I will put up a short video for you to look at and send you an email about this week. Okay.
Okay.
Now let's talk about the future in a different way. Next mod, you're going to be taking what we call senior seminar, HCA464. Basically, what I'm going to want you to be doing is writing a fairly lengthy paper about a topic related to long-term care, a topic of your interest. Now, I say related to long-term care because that's your expressed interest, but some topic that you would like to research in long-term care. And it can be anything you like. It can be the effect of the Affordable Health Care Act on long-term care. It can be effects of changes in Medicare, Medicaid on long-term care. So there's lots. I leave it as wide open as possible so that you can pursue the things that strike your passion.
Okay.
So I suggest you start thinking about that because it is a difficult project. And what we do is we work together to get that work done. Finding the references, identifying the topic, finding the references, basically outlining how you want to do the paper, and then a rough draft of the paper. That is something that I will go through with and read very, very carefully and make suggestions, and then a final, and then you're done.
Okay.
There will probably be some other material in the shell. I'm not quite sure how they've changed that shell in recent months, but that's going to be the essence of what you'll be doing. So we effectively have, an extra 2 weeks since there's no, we're about to have our break for Christmas. And this mod ends and the break starts, and then we pick up again on the 6th of January. So Christy tells me that that's going to be your class, that mod. It's the last one you're going to be taking. So you'll graduate when you finish that.
All right.
Sounds exciting, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I thought I only had 2 more classes. I thought this was my last class.
Yeah, well, the last one is the last thing you have to take, the
Okay.
secret seminar. So anyway, so put that down on your to-do list is to get started on that, deciding what you want to do, and maybe even look up some references. So that's the one other thing I did want to talk to you about. So okay.
All right.
Anything else?
No, sir, that's all.
All righty. Then at the very least, I'll talk to you on Monday.
Okay.
And remember
safe
that.
travels.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a 6:44 a.m. flight. So getting to the airport is going to be fun.
Ooh.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Well, you have a good day. You guys be safe, and I'll talk to you Monday.
Okay. You too. Have a good weekend. And you sound like you're feeling better than your email said you were over the weekend. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I'm starting to feel better. I'm going to work today, so.
Okay. Great. Then I will talk with you later. I'll look forward to your week 2 work when it comes in.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, Crystal. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye now.